Somewhere in the cold waters off the Pacific coast, an old female orca is doing something almost no other animal on Earth does. She stopped having calves decades ago, and yet she's still here, leading her pod, guiding them to food, watching over grandchildren she'll never stop protecting. She's well past her reproductive years, but she's nowhere near done living. In fact, she might be the single most important member of her entire family. Welcome back to WildGenome. Today we're asking a question that sounds almost too strange to be true. Why would evolution let an animal live for decades after it stops being able to reproduce? Because across the vast majority of the animal kingdom, that simply doesn't happen. Most females reproduce until close to the end of their lives. Stopping early and living on regardless should be an evolutionary dead end. And yet here we are. Humans do it. Killer whales do it. And as we're about to find out, the reason why might completely change how you think about what a family is actually for. Let's start with the basics, because menopause itself is stranger than most people realize. Menopause means the permanent end of ovulation and fertility, while the rest of the body keeps functioning normally, often for many more years. In humans, that gap can stretch across 3 or 4 decades. From a pure gene survival standpoint, that's bizarre. Nature is usually ruthless about reproduction. If you can't pass on genes anymore, there's rarely a reason to keep living. So why does this trait exist at all? For a long time, killer whales were held up as one of the only confirmed non-human examples of menopause, alongside us. Female orcas typically stop reproducing somewhere in their 30s or 40s, but can live on for decades afterward, some documented into their 80s and beyond, decades past their last calf. Here's a detail that might surprise you though. More recent research has expanded that list. Scientists have now confirmed menopause in several other toothed whale species too, including short-finned pilot whales, narwhals, belugas, and false killer whales. So it's not literally only 2 species on the entire planet. But it is an extraordinarily rare trait, and killer whales remain the best studied and most dramatic example of it. Out of thousands of mammal species, this pattern shows up in a small, tight cluster, humans, and a handful of long-lived, highly social whales. That, on its own, should make you sit up and pay attention. So what do humans and these whales have in common that almost nothing else does? The answer starts with something called the grandmother hypothesis, and it's one of the more elegant ideas in evolutionary biology. The theory goes like this. In a small number of species, older females stop investing their energy in having more offspring of their own, and instead, redirect all of that energy into helping their existing children and grandchildren survive. If an older female's help increases her grandchildren's chances of survival more than having one more calf of her own would, evolution rewards the stop and help strategy over the keep reproducing one. For that math to work though, you need a very specific set of conditions. You need a species that lives a long time. You need strong, lasting social bonds across generations. And you need older females who actually have valuable knowledge and skills to offer, not just presence, but expertise. Killer whales check every single box. Female orcas can live into their 60s, 70s, even 80s in the wild, decades longer than males typically survive. They live in tight-knit family pods built around female lineages, often staying with their mothers for their entire lives. And critically, older female orcas carry something almost impossible to replace: decades of accumulated knowledge about where to find food, especially during hard years when prey is scarce. Researchers studying wild orca populations off the Pacific Northwest have found something remarkable. Pods led by an older, post-reproductive female are significantly better at locating salmon during years when salmon are hard to find. These grandmother whales aren't just present, they're functioning as living maps, holding institutional memory that took decades to build and can't be downloaded or inherited any other way. And there's something even more striking. Studies tracking these pods over many years found that when an older female orca dies, her adult sons specifically, face a sharp increase in mortality risk in the following years, especially during lean food seasons. Her presence was quite literally keeping them alive. Now here's where it gets personal, because the exact same pattern shows up in us. Anthropologists studying multi-generational human communities have found something almost identical to the Orca data. In several traditional societies studied by researchers, children with a living, actively involved grandmother had measurably better survival rates and often reached adulthood healthier than children without one. This idea even has its own name in human evolutionary biology. The grandmother hypothesis was actually proposed for humans first, before scientists ever confirmed it applied to whales. The theory suggests that grandmothers helped gather food, provided childcare, and passed down survival knowledge, freeing up mothers to have more children sooner, while dramatically boosting the survival odds of the children already born. In other words, a woman past reproductive age wasn't stepping out of the evolutionary game. She was playing a completely different position, arguably a more important one. So let's pause on that for a second, because it reframes something we don't talk about enough. For most of human history, and still today in many cultures, older women have been treated as though their most valuable contribution ended when their fertility did. But biology tells a very different story. The postmenopausal decades may be one of the most functionally important phases of a human contrast. A stretch of time evolution seems to have specifically preserved, rather than something left over by accident. And killer whales prove this isn't a human-specific quirk of culture or coincidence. It's a pattern nature converged on twice, independently, in two extremely different species, separated by tens of millions of years of evolution, one walking on land, one swimming through open ocean, because in both cases, the math worked out the same way. An experienced female, freed from the demands of reproduction, was simply more valuable alive and leading than she would have been having one more offspring. There's still an open question researchers haven't fully answered, though. Why doesn't this happen more often? Elephants, for example, are also long-lived, deeply social animals with strong matriarchs. Yet elephant females continue reproducing well into old age, instead of stopping early. Scientists suspect it comes down to a very specific combination of factors: extreme longevity, tight multi-generational living, and a very particular kind of knowledge that's disproportionately valuable to have around. Get even one of those ingredients slightly wrong, and the evolutionary math doesn't favor menopause at all. It's a genuinely rare convergence, which is exactly why it's so scientifically fascinating. So the next time you think about what a grandmother's role in her family is worth, remember this. Somewhere in the ocean right now, an old female orca, decades past having her last calf, is leading her family through darkened, food-scarce waters, using knowledge no one else in the pod possesses. Not because she has to, because millions of years of evolution decided that keeping her alive and keeping her leading mattered more than anything else she could have done instead. If this made you look at getting older a little differently, that's exactly the kind of science this channel exists for. Subscribe to WildGenome, because next time, we're diving into an animal whose brain works so differently from ours. Scientists are still arguing about what it's even like to think as one. Until then, some of the most important members of any family have already stopped having babies. They just haven't stopped leading.